Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode. We have something special planned for today. So, placement interviews are a tricky phase for everyone, even seasoned interviewers, people with because you don't know exactly what to expect, and the stakes do feel like they're quite high. Especially summers can be nerve-wracking for everyone because of a lot of myths around it, and it's very difficult to know what to expect from various different types of interviews, all the different domains. So we have a very wide array of panelists today, ranging from companies like Bain, PwC, Reckitt, HUL, in different domains: consulting, people with frontman experience, supply chain, marketing. So we have something for everyone, and we're glad you joined us. I will hand it over to the panel to introduce yourselves before we dive right in. So if we can just start with Niharika.
Hi everyone, I'm Niharika Gupta, and so a little bit of background about me. I did my BTech from Manipal in computer science, and then I worked as a software engineer for 3 years with Microsoft. And then I did my MBA from IIM, and I got to intern at Amazon during my summers as a Prodman intern. And currently I'm working with PwC in the DDV IT division, which basically handles the IT part during mergers and acquisitions. So yeah, currently I'm in consulting. So today I guess I'll be talking mostly around how to prep for consulting and Prodman interviews.
Thank you, Niharika. Aditya, you want to go next?
Yeah, hello everyone. I have completed my BTech from IIM Dhanbad. Thereafter, I worked in Maruti Suzuki for 3 years, and I worked in new product development. And then I joined SP Gen to complete my MBA in operations and supply chain management. Then I joined Reckitt, and I'm currently a management trainee in supply chain function. So I will be talking mostly about operation and supply chain management interviews.
Thank you, Aditya. Nishtha?
First off, thanks, Dhaval, for having me here. Hi, everybody. I'm Nishtha. I'm a 2021 IIM graduate, and prior to that, I've done my BCom Accounts Honors from St. Xavier's. I was a fresher when I joined IIM, wherein I interned with HUL, and post getting a PPO, I'm 4 months into my management training stint. I think that said, I'm mostly about everything marketing. Glad to be here.
And Pranav, lastly.
Hey everyone, Pranav here. Currently, I'm working as a junior consultant at Bain, and I graduated from IIM Decode in 21. Before that, I also worked as a decision analytics associate at ZS, and I graduated as a mechanical engineer. Another data point, I also interned at Goldman Sachs in their IB division. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me here, Dhaval, and looking forward to talking to all of you.
Thank you, guys. So as you can see, we have somebody who can help us with every domain we can think of. So if you guys have any questions, please put it down in the comments, and we'll definitely try to address it in the span of the next 1 hour. So that being said, let's just dive right in and say what are the typical processes which go into many of these. So if we can, any of you who want to go first, so just give us a brief idea of what are the typical processes we can expect in interviews for that particular domain, and what are the nuances we should keep in mind. I think we can just start with Nishtha, because I think marketing is what is most familiar to everyone, and then we can see how the others kind of vary from there.
Sure. So first off, of course, we have a customary CV shortlist, and then we do have a GD round, specifically for marketing firms. Most of these marketing firms have a GD round, most of which you have a PI. But recently, I think because things have gone online, a lot of these companies are also having a video interview or an evaluation test between your CV shortlist and your GD. So to put it in brief, you have your customary CV shortlist and evaluation test or a video interview, followed by a GD, wherein if you get shortlisted, you have a PI. So that is what it typically looks like for a marketing shortlist.
Okay, and Aditya, what about supply chain and ops interviews and processes?
So it is very much similar. So again, the CV shortlist is the first and the foremost thing that is done, and then followed by GD, and then followed by 2 to 3 rounds of personal interview. But since the last year, we are seeing a decline in the GD round. So there are more number of personal interviews around and less number of GDs nowadays.
Okay, so when you say GD round, is that like a domain specific GD, or is it quite like a general GD like you have in your marketing?
If I say 80% of the GDs are domain specific, maybe around strategic sourcing or something very specific to supply chain, but 20% of them can have again any kind of GD. Again, it depends on the role that you are applying for. If you are applying in tests,
and that remains true even for summers, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Niharika, if you can just highlight both. Okay, if you can just highlight what happens in a Prodman process during summers.
Sure. So I think everyone's saying that with CV shortlist is, of course, the first step to everything. And then in Prodman interviews, you can expect that there will be 2 to 3 rounds of personal interviews. And usually they'll be case related, sort of, not exactly case related, but they would ask you questions about your experience and kind of case related. Like I'll go into depth later on about that. But that's what you can expect. There won't really be guesstimates or GDs over here for Prodman.
And Pranav, so consulting is well documented, right? So let's focus on finance first. How exactly is the finance process different?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think finance processes are slightly different, wherein your touch points and your conversations start a whole lot earlier. So it's not just something which is taking place on the day of the interview, but once your shortlist out, you've got a lot of touch points, such as you've gotten seminars which are going on ahead out there, workshops which are happening, and then you've got some amount of buddy calls which are happening. So the candidate, so the company is going to want to know the candidate a whole lot better when they're interviewing them on the day of the interview, the day of the final process. So that way, it's slightly different than the other domains.
Interesting point, right? So everybody says, oh, buddy calls are not evaluative. It's about you getting as much, extracting value out of it. But how true is that? Now that you are a buddy as well, how true is it that the buddy calls are non-evaluative, or what?
I think that's a very important question. That is something which is on the top of my mind earlier as well when I was a candidate. This is something I expect would differ from firm to firm. Typically, things which are in control as a candidate is getting absolutely the maximum value you can from that call, while also projecting yourself as a candidate who could fit in well out there and, pass that airport test, wherein the person interviewing you would say, yeah, cool, I'm fine getting stuck on the airport for so many hours, and, you're just fine, comfortable working out there. So you want to project yourself as the best possible candidate, knowing about the domain, etc., but also simultaneously understanding if that role is even making sense for you. Because there's a lot of myths and misconceptions about any particular domain, not just finance or consulting. But I think that is probably one of the most key areas where you can get those ones cleared.
Okay, thank you. So Nishta, if I come back to marketing, right? Now you mentioned that let's leave the GDs out. When we focus only on the interviews, did you have multiple rounds? Were those rounds different, or was it just different people taking similar rounds? How exactly did that work?
So across all the marketing interviews that I've given from summers, I cannot recall one where any company where I had to give more than one PI. It was typically that one PI, but then if we talk about the length and the breadth of the PI or the depth of the interview, it was a mix of both technical questions wherein they check your basic frameworks, on which of course we'll talk a little later. But it was a little bit, it was a mix of technical interview plus your HR. So there was not a need of a separate interview, like 2 different interviews talking about different things, but that one interview was very wholesome, I'd say. So
okay. And so you mentioned that they did, to a certain extent, try to gauge your technical understanding even in summers. So it's not like, oh, it's summers, it's marketing, I just need to have a killer personality and ho gaya.
Absolutely not. I'd say, so specifically for my HUL interview, it was a little less on the HR side. It was more of market sizing. Say, example, if you launch a new product, what would the market be? And, just the successful marketing communications or campaigns that you've seen so far. So not so much about, I'd say, the theory part of it, but also the application of it. So definitely knowing the basic frameworks is a must. And then how can you use it in your real observations?
Okay, that's quite interesting because that's very different from my experience in my marketing interviews. So I guess that does highlight that it is going to differ quite widely from company to company. So you kind of need to be prepared for both possibilities where you're being, asked, being questioned, not questioned, but they're trying to understand you and your personality and how you would deal with situations, and also trying to understand your technical knowledge. Fair enough. And so Aditya, you said there were multiple rounds. So again, are these multiple rounds split, in terms of one is a technical interview and then one is a HR and fit interview kind of situation, or is it just general throughout?
So for SP Gen, the process is a little different. Reason being, we have our internship interviews in the second year.
Right.
So it is expected from us to have the domain knowledge. So that is very important. Coming towards your question that whether we have a separate HR round or separate technical round. So it does not happen that way. For most of the companies, it is a mix of HR questions, CV based questions, and your domain knowledge. So there is no separate or specific round for a particular thing. So it can be a combination of any of these things.
Okay. And what about the Prodman roles, Niharika? Did you have separate rounds there?
Yeah, so similar to what everyone is saying, there's sort of a mixed bag. But again, the interviews I've given, I've realized that the companies have a very different approach. So the Amazon interviews will differ from Microsoft interviews, will differ from, say, Walmart interviews. So for example, in Microsoft and Amazon, they're mostly looking at domain knowledge and a little bit of HR questions and trying to see why you would be a good fit for the company, of course, and CV related questions. But Walmart had one round where they were checking knowledge of everything I'd learned in the first semester. So they were like asking me questions from whatever they know, that we have account courses or marketing courses. So I was asked questions from that, which was a bit of a curveball. So I mean, I would say for Prodman, you would have to figure out based on talk to your seniors, etc., and figure out how different companies do conduct their interviews.
Right. And so Pranav, now that you mentioned that you have many touch points when it comes to a finance role, right? And it starts pretty early on. So how exactly do you kind of prepare yourself for that situation, right? Because it's a hectic process, the first term. You're preparing your CV, you're preparing for these interviews, you're preparing for a vast array of topics at the same time. But then you're also getting these touch points which are started very early. So one, what to expect in these various touch points. So is your buddy call mostly around getting touching base with the basics, getting an understanding of what to expect for your interview, or is there training going on over there? And then in your interviews, obviously, I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of are you the right fit kind of situation questions going on there. So can you help break that down a bit?
Got it. Yeah. For the processes I was a part of, there was definitely there. I understand it would vary quite a bit from company to company, yes, the touch points they choose. But what happens typically for your IB interviews is they're going to start very early with sort of a seminar out there, a workshop out there, and they're going to actually teach you what they're going to question you on later on. So they just start from the very top, introduce themselves. What does the firm do and all of that. So it just starts from the very basic level. After that, you've gotten some amount of interactions which will happen after basis what you have just learned in those rounds. Again, after that, you've gotten some buddy rounds as well. So for the buddy rounds, one thing which cannot be done is you just absolutely coming up with a clean slate saying, yeah, I don't remember anything which happened in the workshop. That's not happening. What typically happen in the buddy round is they are going to ask you questions about your understanding of finance. Now, it's not expected that you're the finished article when you're kind of interviewing here. They understand that, okay, fine, you've just joined in on. And besides that, they're going to also, right from the first round, just understand why you're in this role. Like, why do you really want to be here? That's not something which is tested towards the very end, but right from the beginning. Of course, to different proportions. Like the first buddy call, they're not going to ask you too much about, why this firm, why not this firm. But as you progress, they're going to be indexing a whole lot more on this kind of a scenario. I think the second part of the question was about like, what should we prepare out here, right?
Yeah, because you have a lot of things going on parallelly. So how do you, I mean, you, as you said, you can't be expected to know everything on day one, but come D-Day, when your interview is happening, by that time you should be well versed with everything that's been going on. So how do you kind of phase that whole process out?
Got it. So my understanding is we can kind of break down this knowledge into things which, just general GK and some of your Fin basics. And then you can kind of also have an aspect for what do you know about the firm you're interviewing for. GK would be, okay, fine, I already have this kind of a work experience, so I should know a little bit about that domain and what is going on in that domain. So while at ZS, I had done some pharma consulting projects, so I was expected to know at least a little bit of what is going on in that domain and what is making sense out there. And if there is something huge which is going on, I am expected to know a bit more about that deal as well, saying this is what's happening out here. This is what I understand, not just a very theoretical one saying this company bought this company for so-and-so million, so-and-so billion. But this is my understanding and this is how things are changing. So something about the GK. Next is a Fin knowledge. You're expected to have something, but not like the total package. And by this, I mean, at some point in time in your interview, you're going to just put your hands up and say, hey, sorry, I don't really know. I think this is making sense. This is what I know. This is what is making sense for me, but I don't really know the answer. So that is another aspect. And the third one would be just knowing about the firm a whole lot, because you can't really just go up out there and say, hey, I don't really know about this role. I don't know what's happening out here and what's not. You can ask additional information, but knowing what the firm is doing in the basic direction is also pretty important.
Right. So one thing you mentioned is you were expected to keep in touch with whatever domain you were working in earlier. Now, is that also relevant? I'm pretty sure it's relevant for you, Niharika, when you're doing a Prodman interview, your work ex is relevant in Microsoft. So how often did they come back to, okay, what work have you done there? What did you learn? And kind of incorporate that into the conversation?
So that actually happened for me during the start of most of the interviews, where when they would go through the CV and they would try to understand what sort of work I've done and understand what sort of say technologies I've worked with and what all I have learned. And of course that will differ for everyone, but I think one point that I need to mention over here is that when you're going for Prodman interviews, most of the Prodman roles have a minimum 2 years of work ex cap. So you're of course expected to have some domain knowledge when you go in, and they're also shortlisting you based on your work ex, right? They won't be necessarily shortlisting someone who has worked in marketing before for a Prodman role. So you are expected to have domain knowledge and perhaps not know everything, but know for sure, like know your CV throughout and what work you've done. You should be very, very well versed with it. And of course, know the latest or the hottest tech that's going on. Like, yeah, of course, AI, blockchain, all this, you're going to be questioned on those, and you should be aware of those things and have a passing understanding. So, yeah, I think that was the question, right? Dhaval, anything else?
Yes, and I think that would come back to you as well, Aditya, because you said you worked at Maruti. Relevant work ex, the interviews are domain specific. So how often do they come back to, asking you and questioning about that and, tying it back in with what you're going to do next? Because it's so specific.
So very similar to what Niharika said, that most of the people in supply chain and operations have their work ex. I think more than 90% of them. So it is expected for them to have some domain specific knowledge. And yes, for me, the experience I had, the work specific questions are the first questions, the starting questions in the interview. And they want us to carry that learning and what we can do differently. Now we are studying in MBA and have some MBA knowledge. So what we can do differently, that is also another important thing. So yes, means domain specific knowledge is very important.
Okay, so that's a very interesting point you brought up. So it's not just about knowing what you did, but it's also about kind of introspecting on, oh, I did this, and now that I am in an MBA school and I have spent some time. So what you're saying is a little more relevant to people who are preparing for finals. But now that I've spent a year in this setup, what would I have done differently? What would I have improved on? Becomes an important part of the conversation. Is that correct?
Exactly. And also not just a very theoretical way of doing that thing, but also a very practical way, since you have both the understanding of that domain. Yes.
And now coming to you, Nishtha, you and I are like the beacon of hope for all the freshers out there. So obviously we don't have relevant work ex that we're going to be questioned on. So but then your CV obviously has a lot of things which they must have liked, and which is why you got shortlisted in the first place. So how do they try to incorporate that in your experience in the interviews you gave? How was that brought in, especially for the summers process for all of us out there? Yeah.
I think you rightly mentioned when you said that, especially for a fresher, your CV speaks a lot. I mean, there's little that you talk about in terms of your corporate exposure or theoretical, or how you put your theoretical understanding in application. So, CV, making a solid CV for me was the first thing. And specifically in marketing, what we keep hearing is that you have to have a balanced CV. So you should be good at academics. You talk about your initiatives, which is your POR, how good you come through, and how well you are in things that you take up, which is your awards and achievements, co-curricular achievements. So I think making a solid CV first off, being thorough with it, knowing what you're talking about, because when an interviewer tries to strike a conversation with you, it's not just the factual points he talks about. You should have a storytelling. I mean, for everything that is written on your CV, you should have a story attached to it, like we know. So that was one thing, being thorough with my CV, talking about things that I've done before. Definitely, I've not taken up a lot of corporate projects, so things that I've done in my college in terms of just taking initiatives as part of my POR or extra co-curriculars was one thing that was the highlight. If I talk about my experience or my interview experience across 2 or 3 companies, and then also that is where I think it becomes a little more instrumental for us as freshers to show that we can actually apply our theoretical knowledge in practical application. So when I was asked questions about, say, market sizing, or which is that one brand that we want to launch, that is where the acquired knowledge is, I had to use my acquired knowledge right there. So I think being solid with my CV prep, being ready with all the HR questions, plus of course being thorough with the basic frameworks of marketing and being confident about what you're talking. So I think a bunch of 2-3 things.
Right. So one more thing you mentioned is the whole storytelling aspect. And this is a question for all 3 of you, right? So storytelling, huge part of a marketing interview, because that is something you do want to highlight and make that connect. But whereas when I come to more technical roles like the ones which you 3 got into, how important is the storytelling aspect there? Or is it not that relevant? It's more about being very concise in your communication of your technical knowledge.
So I would say for Prodman interviews, or like actually pretty much all interviews, there should be a conversation between you and the interviewer, because you're not just trying to connect to them as a candidate who's there. Like, yeah, you are trying to show them that, yes, I would be a good colleague for you. So storytelling becomes important when you want to highlight why you are right for the firm. So when they might ask you questions about your work ex or what you learned and all. So yeah, you can give the points in a crisp, dry way, but that's not going to interest even the person in front of you. So you, of course, have to present it as a story, and whatever learnings you are giving, like I think even Aditya mentioned, you have to mention your learnings and how you feel that MBA would be enhancing them, and even what you are expecting to learn from the company that you're trying to join. So the storytelling aspect, I think it would be important across pretty much all the domains.
Either of you want to add anything on that?
Yep. I think I completely echo what Nishtha and Harika said. And just like zooming back a bit, my job as a candidate is not really to tell the interviewer stuff. My job is to make him remember the stuff I tell.
Correct.
And I think the most important or the easiest way to do that is just spin a story so that they remember something. If I just start ratting out my resume in front of them saying, hey, I worked in so-and-so project, XXX numbers up, YY percentage increase, it's not really going to stick. Whereas you saying, hey, this is something I identified, this is what I did, and just trying to spin a story, even try to add some amount of personal touch points out there, it probably does a whole lot. It does good. So it's not just, I don't think it's something which is just very marketing specific. Again, depending on the company and the interview, you're going to probably go for a rather crisper version or something different, but the stories definitely help.
So I want to add on this a little bit. So yeah, I agree 100%. Storytelling is important. But one important thing over here is that you also need to know who is your interviewer. Okay, so you can't tell a story which is not relevant to him or which is not expected for him to understand. So even though it is very very sharp, very small, but again you need to know if possible. Sometimes it is not possible to know the interview and strategize your answer according to that.
That's a good point. And what you also mentioned, Pranav, it's about making them remember. Because I think one of the biggest mistakes people make, which I've seen, right, is people in non-marketing roles don't really prepare those HR questions that thoroughly, and they think of stuff like "tell me about yourself" as just like a, like a checkbox thing. I need to give an answer, and it's very dry and like a snapshot of their CV as is, right? So how important is it to take a step back and, at least for the questions which you are bound to get, right, something about yourself to start with? How important does that become as an icebreaker going in? And how did you guys go about preparing yourself for those set of questions, right? Like, tell me about yourself, or what is your learning, and all of those HR questions which are circulated everywhere. Everybody has them. If you don't have them yet, please ask your seniors, they have them. But how do you guys go about preparing those, and how important was that to your final preparation?
Okay, so I want to answer that.
Yeah.
So I think "tell me about yourself" is one of the most underrated question, but it is a very, very important question. So I agree with Dhaval what he said, that people from specific domains like supply chain, finance might not prepare that much about this thing, but it is very, 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 very important. You need to give time for that, need to prepare a very good answer for that. And yes, as Pranav said, you need to make the interviewer remember you. Then only you can proceed with that.
So Pranav, Niharika, if either of you can just explain how you guys went about preparing for these set of questions, even though you are obviously doing your technical preparations on the side. So how did you do those two simultaneously?
Okay, so I'll go first. So yeah, the "tell me about yourself," like even Aditya mentioned, it is quite crucial because yeah, your CV is in front of the interviewer. They've seen your CV, they've read your CV. What the "tell me about yourself" gives you an opportunity to do is pick up those 3-4 points from your CV that you really want to highlight and sort of weave your story around them, so that when they are just meandering through your CV, they realize, oh right, she mentioned these things, and these are what I can ask about. And for myself personally, so I had left Microsoft and I had then come for my MBA. And in the first few weeks, that's a question I got from everyone, like, why did you do that? So that is something that I actually incorporated into the "tell me about yourself" answer. That why is it that from being a software engineer, I'm now trying to transition to a more prod man type of role. And so I made that part, like that sort of a very condensed one-line version of why MBA is what I tagged onto my "tell me about yourself" story. And at the end, of course, you also throw in 1 or 2 personal things about yourself, like what do you like to do in your free time, because that really fleshes you out as an individual, and it makes you more than just like a person who works. It makes you real to them, like I mentioned, that it makes them think of you as a potential colleague, which is what you want.
Okay.
Yep.
So now, Nishta, this is particularly for the marketing people. I think one misconception which people in marketing have is, I just need to sound really well. So like, it's just with everyone, right? They think the extroverted personality who can talk is definitely going to do well in marketing, going to do well in the interview, because baat karayega wo or karayegi. But I think that can also be a drawback for that same individual, right? Because they get so entrenched in, I just need to sound good and make a story there, as opposed to what am I portraying in that story, right? So maybe you came across some people at your time at school who were like that, or learned from them, or anything along those lines which you might have experienced and saw people tackle so that they did not make those mistakes.
I think, yeah, rightly mentioned. Of course, not good talkers are good marketers. I don't think that's the case. What you have to talk has to be substantial. And I think in marketing interviews, when we say we have to talk nice, it's less about the way you talk or your accent or your fluency. It's a lot more about the structure you're given to the conversation. So for every question that you ask, how well can you think it through? What is your way of thinking about it, and less about how you talk about it. I don't think interviews hang on every word of what you say. It's more of the structure, like I said. So in order to avoid that, I think first off, don't be never to be very, very conscious of the way you're talking about something. When you're given a 10-second or a 15-second to think of something, definitely give it a structure. Give a structure to what you're thinking. Come up with ballpark figures if it's about guesstimates, or just quote instances. For example, if a general question, like most of our marketing interviews, we definitely do prepare for one successful marketing campaign. So even if you probably not asked directly about something, the more you give instances, the more it helps in terms of understand that you're actually interested in the domain that you're talking about. So I think conclusively saying, being very confident, not about the way you're talking or your fluency, but a lot more about the content. Prepare for the content, not about the way or your fluency or the way of speaking.
So it's interesting, right, that you mentioned the whole confidence being important, but you made it clear that it was confidence based on the preparation. It's because you know whatever is asked, I kind of know what I want to say, right? So, and obviously that is not something which happens overnight. Even the most eloquent speaker is going to struggle if they've not gone through the whole preparation process. And the other thing which stands out for me is you mentioned structure, because that is something all of us associate consulting interview prep karna hai, structure banana hai. Everybody else nahi karne ka zarurat hai. But it's not true, right? At some level you need to think like a consultant, but then go in and show I'm going to be able to take that analytical mindset and apply it to the job you're giving me. Is that a fair way of summarizing it?
Correct, right.
Right?
You've rightly captured.
Correct. So now to do this whole process, you were a fresher, not from a marketing background. So how did you go about it? How early did you start? What were the key sources of information that you used, and how did you go about it?
Thank you for asking that. Because when I started off, it was actually just the opposite call for me, because I'm a BCom accounts honors graduate. So finance is like just the instinct, comes up naturally. I'll definitely go for finance. But I definitely did want to venture into something that, no offense to anyone, that was a little more dynamic in nature. And that's when I actually started researching a little more. Dhaval, were you about to say something?
I was just going to say Pranav is not going to take offense, but you can go on.
Yeah, so I started talking to my seniors. I did a little bit of a research on the different domains, and right from the day that I started off, it was less about the summer placement, but for me deciding which is the domain that I really want to go for. Because for a fresher, it's more or less like a clean slate for you to start off. So I think that's when I had conversation. I just had interviews. I mean, I looked at different interviews on the internet, and I applied for marketing interest group, which is MPAR. So being a part of MPAR, I learned a lot more about marketing. I mean, doing just the basic stuff, articles or the crashes that we published. I learned a lot more about marketing. So that's where a major chunk of my interest came from. And then it also got validated by a certification. Now, certification, of course, people have very different views, but then I took one certification where I actually wanted to explore if really marketing is my calling or not. So I think I really dedicated my time to MPAR and the certification that I'm talking about, Craftshala Summers Project, Summers Pro. So I think both of these things together gave me the confidence that marketing is, of course, something that I do enjoy. So yeah, that's how I went about it.
Right. So I think one thing to highlight is it's not actually about the certification, right? It's about the work which you put in during that certification. So it's not like if somebody signs up for the same program and kar liya certificate mil gaya, that's what helped you. It's the activities you did, the exercises you did, the analysis which was a part of that program, which kind of primed you to think in a certain way come the interview, correct?
Correct. So actually trying to learn from the certification, not really think of it like a CV point.
Exactly.
Put it in a sentence.
Right. So that's fair enough coming from marketing, right? But what about, so if I come to you, Niharika, for your Prodman interviews first, how did you go about preparing for those? Because I would assume there's a lot of different technologies. Some you might have worked with, some you didn't. So how do you prioritize there, and how did you go about it? Yeah.
So the main things that I felt I had to study for Prodman interviews were, first of all, you need to know how to solve any problem given to you. So problem this is where it's sort of similar to consulting, where you have in consulting you have various frameworks for different types of problems. Here, the two most popular ones that people who are prepping for ProdMan will know are the Circle and the STAR frameworks. And like the Circle framework is something preferred by Microsoft, STAR by Amazon, and the other companies you can do it as you wish, and you can solve it. So for preparing for those, the first thing I did was I read a book. I think it's Decode and Conquer by Lewis Lynn. So I think that book was an amazing resource, and it like really gave me a starting point where I got to learn about these frameworks first. And then I was able to, of course, then you can just search online for different sorts of cases and have practice with your friends, and have them ask you questions like, what product do you think is needed in the world, or take an app you use on the daily basis, what features would you add to it and why? And then you use these frameworks to try and solve those. So practicing that was very crucial, first of all. The second most important thing was learning about wireframes and like seeing how to develop those. So for like you, and the main thing was incorporating that into my daily life. So now if I'm using any app or visiting a website, then I'm constantly thinking about these things in the back of my mind. I'm thinking, hey, what's a feature that I can change here? Or how would I redesign this website, or like make wireframes for it accordingly? So once you start doing that and you get into the habit of that, then in an interview, no matter what sort of question they ask, after taking a couple of minutes, you'll be able to come up with something. And so I think that's the main way that you should prep for your ProdMan interviews. Apart from that, like I mentioned, like you cannot know every single technology, of course. And much like Pranav was mentioning in PIN, there'll come a point where they'll ask you something and you'll have to say that, hey, I do not know this. So that's completely fine, of course. But much like in consulting, they're trying to see how you think things through. The solution is not quite as important. Like the final solution, what I mean. It's rather the road or the path that you're taking to get to that. So they're looking at your critical and structured thinking over there.
I think that was a very interesting point you mentioned of trying to incorporate that into your daily life. So you're taking it away from being just a interview prep activity and kind of, as we were talking with Nishta earlier also, right? Priming yourself just to start thinking in that direction. So if you do that for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks leading up to your interview, come the time of the processes, it's almost second nature, at least for that period of time, right? And if you stick to it, it sticks. Fair enough. And so Aditya, if I come to you and ask how you went about your process, or your friends, others who were applying for ops roles, supply chain roles, how do you go about preparing for that exactly?
Okay, so for SP folks, it's a little different, as I said earlier. So we have 1 year almost to have some preparation of this. So I have a different way of thinking. For me, I think if the more the experience I have, the better I can perform in the interview, and the more confident I will be. So what I focus is for my preparation, not just the the question and answer, the HR question answer, the technical question answer, but also the practical knowledge I can have. So I participated in many corporate competitions, work for many live project, work with J&J, Asian Paints, Reckitt, and those were the background or the backbone for my whatever I am saying in the interview. So when I say with my real-time experience in the interview, that make a very strong point, and that is very relatable, and you automatically get the confidence of saying it. So yeah, means I approach it a little different way, but yes, most 90% of my time invested in these things, yes, and 10% of the time is invested in what actually I will be saying in the interview.
So I think that's something which is super relevant to anybody preparing for finals. Okay, if you're doing case comms, especially ones which are case comms live projects, especially ones which are related to the domain, use that as a talking point. Even if whether you won or not is secondary, but if you can show ki, oh, I went through this experience and I've still learned from it, and incorporate that in, one, obviously you're coming from a place where you already have a little bit knowledge about that project, and if your question, you'll be able to defend it. Two, you're also showing ki I don't need to be given a job to take initiative to kind of learn from it. I'm learning throughout, and that's something obviously a company does want to look at.
Exactly.
Right now, if I come to you, Pranav, we did already speak about how you went about the whole thing for a finance role, right? But now if you come to the elephant in the room, consulting, how do you go about the start? How did you when did you start? How did you go about the preparation? There are a million sources. What did you use? What worked for you? And any advice you have for the people who aspire?
Good. Well, yeah, you rightly said there's a lot of sources. You've got casebooks from all across the world. And when you're starting out, it's just very, very complicated when you don't understand what should I touch upon, what should I not. But I think it's very similar for consulting and finance, wherein first point of reference, talk to people who've already done this. You can talk to people who are already at the firm you're targeting, or someone who's intern there who knows the process. So as to understand what is going to be asked you, what is the kind of conversation which is going to happen out there. That is something you can always do. This is something which is very, very important for your fin interviews, rather, wherein your base, which is actually being built, is you asking them what was asked, how is it typically going to progress. Whereas for consulting, you know, okay, fine, I need to build, these are the type of cases, these are the type of structures out here. And I am going to kind of study these through the case books, understand the structures, and going to apply them to different problems. Again, an important point to keep in note is case frameworks are more like a compass. They're not really, you know, the only path which is leading to the solutions. That is one difference out there, but pretty much the same. So consulting, your point is going to be your case books, which are here. You've got a lot of A. C is very, very good for frameworks as well. You've got domain knowledge, which is coming in. I think FMS has got a very good section wherein they're just covering some sectoral knowledge out there. SPGen also has got a good framework for fin cases as well. That is something which goes in. Besides just cases, you should also be looking at numbers and being very comfortable with them. So you're going to be doing guesstimates as well. And like Nishta and Niharika also mentioned before, you know, just ingraining all the knowledge you've gotten so as to look at everyday problems through that lens. Guesstimates are something which can be done very, very easily from that as well. You're just sitting in the mess, eating food. Okay, fine. What are the amount of plates which are actually used every day out here? This is something which just very, very frequently happens during that prep season. It's a cliche, but it does happen. So something on those lines, that definitely does help.
So you're saying annoy your friends by constantly talking about these kind of questions and asking for their input, right?
Hey, there'll be a lot of people who are preparing with you. So you don't have to annoy random people.
Okay.
It'll happen.
Right. So that's interesting, right? Because you said one, you clearly mentioned it's not one source of information. It is a very wide source, a wide number of sources, and you're picking up bits and pieces from different places and making it work for you. And that would be different for everyone, right? Because say you already have a strong fin understanding, so you're not really concentrating on that. You're concentrating on stuff you didn't know. Whereas somebody else who may be who has really good sectoral understanding might be focusing on sources where he she can pick up more from finance. So it's about curating your preparation to your needs and not blindly following seniors or other people's advice. And that's important, right?
I mean, if you're a CA, I mean, what new are you really going to learn in the first term that, you know, they're going to ask? Like, you're already done with all that technical knowledge, man.
Right.
But even for any interview, if you just break it down, it's your technical skills out there, something to do with yourself, like some amount of personal skills and an aspect of how you're actually delivering your answer. Now, no matter what experience you've got, I think there is aspects which you can improve on for this interview. Even if you know everything under the sun for that technical domain, you probably can work on how you're delivering the answer and how you're coming across as a person.
Okay, so I think this goes out for all four of you, right? So as you mentioned, it's really important about the delivery, and I think we've all spoken about it at length. So if any of you can address how to go about improving on that delivery, right? Because we've spoken how it is important. Some people get it naturally fine, but for those of us who don't, how do we go about preparing for it? And if you know anything which worked for you, for people, for your friends, what was that all about?
Okay, so I'll take this up. How to prepare for your delivery, right? I think again over here, it's a different folks, different strokes kind of thing. For someone, they might be more comfortable jotting down points and then like just having those rough ideas. These are the data points we'll talk about, and then forming the narrative around it. Whereas others might want to like literally jot down every single line of how they will speak and then practice that over and over. But no matter which approach you're taking, the main thing is that have a sounding board and use some people and go and talk to them about it, like tell them your story, practice your delivery in front of them, and then take constructive feedback from them. So someone might tell you, hey, okay, I got it, but like you took a little too long to give the context, so maybe you can shorten that part, etc. So that will like really help you curate your content. And like we had talked about preparing for HR questions, and that becomes crucial here because you need to have content that can sort of be used for and for various questions. So for example, if you're asked your biggest strengths and weaknesses versus you're asked, oh, hey, what was the lowest point in your life and how did you overcome that? If you have some sort of content that can cater to both these questions, then you're golden. Then it means that no matter what sort of questions they ask you, you'll have something in the back of your mind. So actually, I would say look back on your life, basically, anything, your personal, professional, school, college time, anything, and pick out instances that really stand out to you, that you feel helped you become the person that you are today, that really basically help mold the person that you are today. And those are the points that you can highlight or tack onto your storytelling that will flesh you out in the interviews.
That's a very interesting point you highlighted, right? It's about introspecting and trying to humanize that CV. And definitely something I also did. And I think it's something where I know you said it from a broadman perspective, but it's something which is even like it's an integral part of the whole marketing process of preparation, right?
I think it's an integral part of all interview processes, because I think often when summers comes around, people get bogged down into thinking that, oh, I need to study frameworks, I need to study my CV, I need to get certifications, I need this on the list. And that's fine. You're preparing your CV because that's what's getting you a foot into the door. And that's why they sometimes lose out on what to do once you are in. And that is where this part becomes crucial, where you sit and, like you were saying, Dhaval, that you introspect and you humanize the CV.
Okay. So Nishta, if I come to you, right? As Niharika mentioned, talk to people, get feedback. So how important was that as a part of your preparation, and how did you go about it? So did you go to seniors? Did you go to your batchmates? Did you go to people, already in the industry that you might know? What was the route you took?
So for me, it was a little different when it came to specifically these HR questions. It was a lot more about introspective of what I want to talk about. There might be a lot of things that are on my plate, but what are the best experiences that I want to deliver? So it was of course, this varies across individuals, but for me, it was less about talking to other people and trying to get a view from them. It was definitely reaching out to one or two seniors that I really looked forward. I really look forward to having conversations with them that were from similar domain. So talking to them about my relevant experiences, getting a feedback from them, or even actually, I actually just talked to my mom and my sister about it. If there's something that's really that is something that has to be talked about, but I'm missing on it. So because they actually remember things that we sometimes miss on, at least in my case. So I think it was a lot more inward in nature than getting a lot of external feedback or orientation. For me, it was a lot more about introspection and framing the way I want to talk about it.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned, even though you say it's a whole lot of introspection, there's still multiple people involved. So it's not I'm a lone wolf and everybody here is competition and I have to go this alone. Usko bol diya, wo mera story chori karega. Does not work. You need to get, you're all going through it together. So some sort of give and take will happen, right? And if I ask you in particular, Aditya, now, you said you were doing your interviews in second year, which obviously all the people in finals are doing. So whom do you reach out to? Because maybe you're still in touch with your seniors, maybe you're not, but in summers, seniors become the obvious choice. What happens in second?
I've gone through interviews in first year as well. So, but basically, just to help people and what my friends also did, there are various aspects which are covered by Nishtha and Niharika, but there are two more things what you can do. You can record yourself, that can help you, giving a proper delivery. And second, apart from the content that you are preparing and the tone in which you are going to say that, deliver that answer, you need to also see your body language. Most of the interviews are happening on, in Zoom or MS Teams. So even the top part of your body is also project the confidence and the assertiveness by which you are providing your answer. So that part is also important for few people. So that is important. For me, I have reached out to my alums, my friends in other B schools, and it is not about that other people can steal your answer or something like that, because you are giving that personal touch to your every answer. So do not be afraid of that. Reach out to everyone, and not just I'm from supply chain, right? I ask people from finance to take my interview. I ask people from marketing to take my interview. So that is also important, because the person who is on the other side of the table can be from any domain. So you need to be ready for that.
That's a interesting point, right? Because so obviously people preparing for consulting do think of that. Okay, I want to talk to people in finance. I want to talk to people in marketing, because the same case, they will both look at it very differently. But what you mentioned of, like, supply is a very technical field, but even then your interviewer may not necessarily be a hardcore supply person. And if you can't learn how to communicate technical stuff to somebody without the technical knowledge, you will miss out on that opportunity, right? So that's a good point. Now, Pranav, if I come to you and ask you about how you went about this aspect of in your consulting prep, right? Of trying to get more people involved. So what was it? Were you trying to do cases with many different people, or was it like a small group of people and repeatedly do it with them so you could, track how you're performing, or what was your process?
I think in the beginning, you're kind of looking at a lot of people to do cases, because you don't really know who you're kind of gelling with, who's giving you that level of feedback, and what is actually working out for you. So, some people might be very, very good at taking cases, delivering all of that, but they're probably not giving you that brutal feedback, which you need to actually get better. And from some people, you're just not going to do a case one-sided. You're kind of going to, give them the case as well. And you're probably not being able to receive as much from them, understanding, okay, this is how they're breaking down problem. It's way different from mine or something like that, for me to actually get better. So at the starting, you're looking at a larger pool. Later on, you're kind of looking at a very small group wherein you're just doing some amount of cases, some sort of revision. But as time ticks by, you're probably also going to be looking to reduce the number of cases and just, focusing on ingraining whatever you've learned, so that all your knowledge is there with you, not just continuing with cases forever and ever, not looking to do 10, 20 cases, but rather, I think my speaker got cut.
Okay. And Niharika, so there's something where you can add. So you were doing consulting prep, but it was a sort of a niche consulting prep, right? Where you're trying to take technical knowledge as well as and incorporate it into consulting. So how is that sort of prep, different from what Pranav has mentioned, or was it the same process?
To start with, it was a somewhat a similar process, because I needed the experience with doing cases, no matter what sort of cases. I needed to develop that structured thinking approach, like we have talked about, right? So to start with, it was like that. But then I had to focus on this very niche area of M&A cases, which were around IT. And the main issue that I faced was that there were no such cases available in any of the case books. There was maybe one case I found, I think. And so how do you prep for such things when you do not have the cases? So I did the next best thing, which was I prepped M&A cases, whatever I could find. And while I knew that maybe I can't prep the IT part of it, I trusted that my technical knowledge that I've had will pull me through, because I know I'm prepping for Prodman also at the same time, where I'm, like I mentioned, I'm looking at that with the Prodman perspective, where, like I mentioned, the features, products, you look at your everyday life and you think of how to deal with that, and you're applying those frameworks over there. So I realized that even if I can't practice that very one specific case, let's say, that I need for the interview, when the time comes, I will be able to sort of amalgamate my knowledge into an approach that would work for me, which is what happened. So I don't know how helpful this is, that you sort of trust the process, but I think the confidence part comes in where you trust yourself enough and you know that, hey, I've prepped enough. I may not have prepped for this specific thing, but I have the tools and the knowledge to pull me through. And I think that's
what you're trying to say is you might not always find exactly what you're preparing for, but it's better to kind of understand what are the key pillars for that particular role or that particular thing. Put all those things in place and then back yourself that I know the fundamentals and I'll be able to put it together at that point in time.
Because I think even like the interviewers know what sort of material is available for your prep out there. So if you can't find any prep, the interviewers know, but they're looking that, hey, like you mentioned, that you have that foundational base that no matter what you're given, that you will be able to figure it out. And that's what's the most crucial thing that they're trying to judge in you.
Right. So there's one thing I think all four of you, and this I know is a question which divides people, but when you're going through the whole prep process, do you back yourself and say, this is what I want to do, this is what I will prepare for, and this is my goal? Or do you kind of, and especially for summers, right? Or do you say, मैं सब कुछ prepare करूँगा, मैं सब कुछ prepare करूँगी, and whatever opportunity I get, I will try and do that? So what's your take on this, guys? And what would your advice be for the people who are going through this right now? Pranav, let's start with you.
All right. So just to be clear, you're talking about, targeting domains at first and then looking at what
Yes. So your preparation, do you go domain, like do you try to prepare for every domain under the sun that you are going to apply for? I'm not even going into do you apply for all? Okay, let's leave that for another day. But when you're going through your prep, do you try and prep for every particular domain that you know? मैं 3 domain में apply करूँगा. Do I prepare for all 3? Or do I say, this is my target, this is what I want to do, I'm going to back myself and I'm going to prepare really well for this?
Yeah, I mean, when I did start with the MBA, I had no idea about what I really want to do. So it's pretty much a blank field very often, but what you'd probably have an idea about when starting is, this is something I really don't want to do. You've got that negative list sometimes, and you've also often got a positive list saying, yeah, fine, these 2-3 things are making sense for me. Of that, 1 and 2 are really making sense. I really want to do this, and maybe this. So something which is at the top for me, it was Fin consulting. That is something I really want to target, and that is what I started with. And even for those ones, you do an 80-20 saying, I can't cover everything under the sun if I'm looking for multiple domains. It's just not happening. I don't have enough time. So I'd probably just cover up 80% of the things which are, typically used out there. And that is the approach I would take.
Okay. And Niharika?
So for me, I was pretty sure I wanted Prodman, but you need to have like one backup vertical and domain is what I would say. So I prep for consulting and Prodman because those are the things that made sense for my profile. And even like, I know you said that you are not talking about applying to everything under the sun, but I actually restricted myself to certain companies only, because even within Prodman, like I mentioned, all companies have a very different approach and you might have to prep differently for the different companies. So there was no point in spreading myself too thin. Like Pranav says, you really don't have the time to prep for everything. So focus on getting like I focused on getting my foundational base there for the 2 domains that I had chosen. And that was basically it. And then I also restricted the company. So that helped with whatever like little extras that I needed to prep on top. That helped me restrict my time. So I wasn't really going for a jack of all trades, master of none approach is basically what I'm trying to say here. Yeah.
And what about you, Nishtha? Because you mentioned earlier that you obviously had that Fin background coming from your undergrad. And obviously that was an easy thing for you to prep, but you were pretty clear that this is something that interests you. So then how did you split your time in the whole prep process to go about it?
My focus was not really, once that I decided that S&M is something I really wanted to venture into for starters, I came straight to deciding what should I really be prepping for, which was, first off, was Kotler is the Bible for us, but of course we don't prep the entire Kotler. So Kotler Crasher came handy for me. That's what I did. And I try to get thorough with all the basic marketing frameworks, market sizing, pricing, new launch, and all these basic models is what I focused on. And specifically, we have a GD. So for us, it becomes all the more instrumental to be aware of what's happening just beyond your domain. So understanding what's happening in the world around for a specific company that you're going, what are the challenges that, say, for example, an FMCG is facing, what are the recent trends that are coming up. So having a touch base with that, and also then prepping specifically for the company that I want to go for. So the only way for me to communicate that I'm really interested in the company is when I talk to the interview about the company itself. So I think a bunch of 2 or 3 things together, getting complete understanding of your basics, your HR questions, and then also preparing for the company and for your GD, a little bit of what's going around and having a feel on it. That's what
So there is a question which I think you would be perfect to answer, Nishta, right? So it's somebody who's a fresher from BCom graduate. They're confused finance or marketing in some ways. So how did you figure out which one you wanted to do, and any advice you have for them?
Okay, that's a very, very interesting question. So first off, if you've already done something as a BCom accounts honors graduate, if you've already taken up an internship in finance or in accounting, you already have a little bit of an idea whether you enjoyed your work or not. If not, I think it's the right time for you to, of course, we have summers around the corner. So for you, the best way to do would be to take up something take up something in marketing and in finance, a small certification or even a small course that interests you, and try to, or even the subjects that you study in class, and then try to understand what is it that you're really enjoying. So for me, like I said, I really enjoyed how brands communicated, and being on the other side, I've really enjoyed these communications. So trying to understand how these communications are drafted, what goes into marketing and sales is something that really interested me. So I think definitely reflect a lot in your class when you're attending your college. Do pay a lot more attention to both of these subjects and see what you're actually enjoying. Talk to your seniors about the domain, because what we study in theory is not actually completely what we do once we start our jobs. So have a lot of conversations around it. And I think this way you'll figure out what truly is your calling. All the best to whoever's asked the question.
And I think one more thing would be using the summer internship and not seeing it as the key. If I take this up, then that is the end. That's what I'm pigeonholed in for the rest of my life. But actually taking it as an opportunity to try out. If you're really confused, pick one, get in, experience it. If you love it, nothing like it. If you don't, you know, okay, this is not what I want to do in finals, and probably concentrate on the other, right? So we've spoken at length about what are all the things to do, but I'm sure we've all come across some things which were like, okay, this is an absolute do not do this, or something we should definitely avoid. So if you guys can just highlight some of those things you've come across from your experience. Any of you want to go?
So I would like to start. So I want to cover both the things. First, I want to cover what all things, normally a supply chain and operation folks miss. So you need to be, prepare, have the basic understanding of financial statements and management accounting, which, most of the supply folks don't think is necessary. But yes, nowadays, since you are doing post-graduation in management, it is very, very important. And they are, these things are asked in the interviews. So that is most important. Second is, not just the consulting interviews, but also in normal interviews, interviewers are started asking guesstimates and small cases. Okay, so be ready with that as well. Anything can come up, and you need to be prepared for that. Things which you need to avoid. Stop guessing. First of all, if if you're guessing, it should be based on some practical experience, or you should let the person know that you are not very sure of that answer, but as far as your knowledge, as far as your practical knowledge concerned, this much, that this is the thing that can be done, or this is the thing you can do about it. So do not guess. Second is under preparing your CV, which is, many people do. Each and every CV point needs to be prepared thoroughly. There are some cases happened with my friend that one CV point is discussed for half an hour. So you need to be very, very thorough with that.
That's a very important point you brought up, and I do not think it's specific only for supply chain, right? Of being comfortable reading a P&L statement or discussing it, right? Even marketing, I think when you come to finals, that is like a basic knowledge that is expected of every MBA student. If not, even if I'm giving you a prod man role or whatever today, 5 years down the road, you're going to be in a position where you're heading the team or responsible for your own P&L. If you can't read it, what am I investing 5 years in you for, right? I mean, obviously it's something you can learn, but it also does not reflect well on you that after a year and a half in a B school environment, you're not comfortable reading a P&L.
Exactly.
So that's a very important point you brought up, Aditya. Thank you. So what about you, Pranav, Niharika, anything in your experience around that?
Hey, yeah, I think just on the lines Aditya spoke, I think one very important point is just to be 80-20, not to cover everything under the sun. In any interview, of course, you're going to have some context about what you're interviewing for. You know what is going to be asked, and you know some of the big building blocks out there, which you just can't miss. Like if you're going for any interview, you can't be underprepared for your CV, like Aditya said. If you miss something out there, it's not going to really come up across as well. If you're going for a fin interview and you don't know how all the financial statements flow into each other, it's not going to come across as well. So these are the things which you definitely can't get wrong. You probably want to focus on these things first rather than just going for any tertiary knowledge, which you've just heard as in, hey, somebody somewhere was asked this question in an interview, I should also prepare, which is probably just going to take a lot of time. So just get those important building blocks done first, and then try to build on that knowledge to other things which you think might be good to have. You can't miss out on some things. Also, don't try to gas around in your interview. These people, the people who are interviewing you, be it, even 1 year in the firm, they know what they're talking about. And if you just start being absolutely talking about a lot of crap, they're going to figure it out because they've been on the other side as well. So it's better to just say, hey, I think this is what is making sense. This is what I am thinking about, but I really don't know the answer. And the third one is just to kind of zoom out and say, summers are not the end of the world. There's a lot more which is actually in store. I'm here not just for my placements, but actually learning a lot of things. You've got case competitions, a lot of activities to learn, network, and tons of things. Just have fun in the B school. So just thinking that, hey, summer placements, that's it. No, you've got one more round of placements waiting for you as well. And not just be very zoomed in on those summer placements and whatever job you're getting.
And I think it's also important to highlight that summer placements is also an opportunity to test the waters, right?
Exactly.
If you don't like it, it's fine. You know what you don't want to do. You're not like bound by a contract of life idhar hi hai. So don't, go in with that knowledge and it'll help. Like it takes a lot of the stress and the edge off, right? And obviously that helps in confidence. There is another question, Nishta, I think, which you can help us with. So which is more important in the interview, right? For marketing, confidence, content, or fluency? I know we covered this. So if you want to just address that.
I'd say a healthy mix of all of them. For sure, your content, for sure, what you're talking about has to make a lot of sense to the interviewer. And to pull it off, you should have the confidence. And actually, confidence comes from the content that you're talking about. If you've prepared well enough, your prep would never be enough. Even an hour before your interview, you never feel you've done enough. But being confident on what you've said or what you've prepared so far, that will be confident on what you're saying. So I'd say a healthy mix of both. If you prep well, you would most probably be a lot more confident than otherwise. So being confident on your delivery and your content.
Also, so coming back to Pranav, what you were saying, right? You and Aditya did both mention one thing. You summarize it as saying don't gas around or faff or globe or whatever you call it wherever you are. But essentially what you're both saying is at a certain point in your interview, you're going to hit that mark where you don't know the answer. The interviewer probably knows you don't know the answer and is looking for when you raise your hands and are at least willing to accept, okay, I'm not very confident with this, and then go on and sort of make an educated guess based on your experience, is what Aditya said. And I think that's important because a lot of us go into the room feeling I have to answer everything which is thrown at me. Like if they ask me the mass of the sun, meko uska bhi answer malum hona chahiye. But it's not true. And it's important for us, and it's easy for us to say it because now we're on the other side. The interviews are done, we're all placed, whatever. But it is helpful to know this going into the interview as well, right? So Niharika, if you also wanted to just add something along those lines of things to avoid, because Pranav mentioned 80-20.
Yeah, so basically don't be a sheep. Like we mentioned, don't just apply to everything because all of your friends are applying to those companies. Because having, let's say, we've seen this a lot during our time, where people, they clear the shortlist and then they have an interview to go for, and it's a company they're absolutely not interested in, and that just adds to their stress, where they feel like, oh god, I have to go give this interview that I really don't want to. So avoid that stress. And I know it's hard when in summers there's like a lot of, everyone is just stressed around you, there's a lot of pressure, you feel the need to apply to every single thing under the sun. So really don't do that. And this is where your prep beforehand, where after, if you've done the introspection on yourself, that would really come in handy, because you would know what sort of person you are. Those personality tests and all you take, guys, honestly do them seriously. It would help you narrow down the sort of companies that you would want to work at, and that is extremely crucial. And second thing that I would say is, especially for Prodman and consulting interviews, you need to learn to think out loud. I think that is very crucial in the interview, because that's what they're looking for. They're not looking for the solution. They're looking at how are you getting to the solution. So you need to be able to think out loud. And that is something that I honestly struggled with, because I'm not used to that. I'm used to thinking first and then just giving like the synopsis or whatever I've managed to do. So learning to do that was a bit of a journey for me. And that is one thing that I actually had to focus on during my prep. So I think those are the two main do's or don'ts, however you want to put them, that are from my side.
Okay, thank you so much. Anything any of you guys want to add before we close? I feel like a teacher in a Zoom class waiting for an answer suddenly.
I think we covered it all.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So thank you guys so much for taking out time on your day off. It has been a pleasure. You guys have been super helpful. I hope all of you guys watching found some piece of advice which helps you. One last thing I would like to say is, as Pranav mentioned, right? Summers is not the end of the world. It's actually just the start. If you're a fresher, it's genuinely just the start of your journey. Take it seriously, but do not put yourself under unnecessary pressure. And as Niharika mentioned, please be mindful of what you're doing, right? If you're absolutely sure you don't want to do something, don't force yourself just because Paki Janta kar rahi hai or whatever. You're going to add to your own stress, right? I know Pranav is not very happy with me saying this, but it is what it is, guys. And we wish you all the very best for your preparation, for all your processes. And I say this without asking the four of them, but you can reach out to any of us on LinkedIn if you need any help or advice. And they're all amazing people. They will reply when they get the time. So maybe not right away, but they will definitely reply and help you guys out. Thank you so much. And we will see you again with another episode.
Thanks, guys. Best of luck.
Thank you, Dhaval, for having us.
Thank
All
you.
the best,
Good luck,
guys.
everybody.